Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
A good Tvach Shua Tov. We're learning Mishna Gittin, Parakeh, chapter 5, Mishnah Zai, Mishnah 7. Before we begin, today's Mishnah has been sponsored by the Garland children as a merit for Refuah Shalema for their uncle, Chaim Gavriel ben Etel Gita. Refuah Shalema. Amen. Okay, so the Mishnah reads like this. We're talking about a cherish. Now, a cherish we translate as a deaf mute. Can't hear, can't talk, and therefore, because of that, considered mentally incompetent. And according to Torah law, such a person, similar to a minor, cannot really do any kind of transactions. However, as we have mentioned beforehand, at the same time, the sages realized that these people are in a situation, sometimes they don't have anyone to take care of them. They got to take care of themselves. And if they're not going to be able to carry on, some basic business transactions to support themselves, they're going to be in big trouble. And therefore, there were certain situations where the Chachamim instituted that they can make a transaction. The times of the Mishnah had the power they were able to make laws regarding people's monies. Even if according to Torah law, the money, was not to be transacted, they had the power over the money to say that it is transacted. And they did that for the benefit of the cheresh, of this person. Okay, so therefore the Mishnah says like this. Cheresh roimeis v'nirmaz. A cheresh may, now we're going to translate it like the way they have it here. Romeis means to what? Remez means to hint, right? We would translate it as, or we would like initially translate, or at least I would, a deaf mute can make a hint, he can hint and be hinted to. Now, the way they translate it here is a deaf mute may signal. And signal in this context means to signal with one's hands or head. Okay, so a deaf mute may signal with his hands or with his head his intentions to make a transactions. That's romes. He can make the signal, and again, signal here means hands or head. And the nirmaz and others may signal to him their intentions. I mean, a signal his acceptance and response. In either case, his signals are considered a true indication of his intent, and the transaction is legally binding. Okay? So basically, his hinting or his signaling means either with his hands or his head to make some kind of a transaction. Another person can signal to him that they want to make a transaction, and he can then signal back that he accepts. All these signals that we're talking about, according to the first opinion of the Mishnah, are what's needed, or they're good enough, and not only good enough, there's what's needed in order for a transaction to be made together with this cherish. Now I read to you here from the notes. If a deaf mute's transactions are not valid, people will not sell anything to them or buy anything from them. Therefore, to ensure that people will sell them their basic needs, and that they have the money to which to buy them, the rabbis gave some limited powers of buying and selling. Okay, that's the background. Then about this law, number 3, another note here, quoting from the Bartanura, or citing from the Bartanura. This law applies not only where the deaf mute signals with his head or his hands, in which case his intent is relatively clear, but even where he indicates that he agrees to someone else's signal, in which case the possibility of understanding is greater. Meaning, there would be a reason, Mishnah has to mention both, that he can signal and that people can signal to him. Because it would seem like, well, if he's signaling, if he's initiating he's the one initiating things, then the signal is enough to know that, what his intentions are clear. But one might think that when someone else signals to him and then he responds to that, maybe that's not as clear a signal, a clear enough signal to his intent, and you might have thought it doesn't work, and therefore the Mishnah says not only he may signal, but others may signal to him. Now, Mishnah continues. Uben Beseira Omer, the sage known as Ben Beseira, the son of Beseira, said, "Kaifetz v'nikpatz." Now, what he can do is he may even mouth his intentions, and others may mouth their intentions to him. According to Ben Beseira, he does not need to signal with his hands or head. And number 4 brings down here, although a deaf mute cannot voice his words, he can mouth them with his lips and have others try to read his lips. Similarly, he could try to read the lips of others. Although this method of communication is not as reliable as head and hand signals, Ben Beseira holds that the rabbis accepted it as sufficient to render a deaf mute's transactions valid. That's Ben Beseira. I don't know really how to explain why one set of signals is better than the other, but that's what the Mishnah is saying. And Ben Beseira went as far as to say that even mouthing would be enough. The Tanna Kama, however, holds that it does not suffice for a deaf mute to merely mouth his intentions. Rather, he must communicate in a clearer fashion by signaling with his hands or head. I guess for some reason, mouthing it wouldn't just be as clear. They couldn't necessarily understand him, or assume that he understood the mouthing so much. But signals, hand signals, head signals, that was a clearer form, and that, according to Tanna Kama, is what works. The mouthing does not work. The Mishnah says, b'metaltalin. This all is going to work for a movable property. It doesn't help for buying and selling land. It only helps doing business transactions with metaltalin, with movable objects. And they explain that here as, the rabbis accepted the transactions of a deaf mute only so that he could acquire his basic needs. Since this can usually be achieved with buying and selling movable property alone, Ben Beseira does not extend his leniency to transactions involving land. Okay? So therefore, metaltalin is what you need for basic living, and therefore it was there that they allowed these kinds of signals to affect the transaction between the chayresh and others. Now, the next example of the Mishnah is ha'pa'otais. Pa'otais are young children, and young children here applies. Reading here from the notes, this applies to children who are only 7 years old, provided that they understand the concept of buying and selling. If a 4-year-old is out there, well, I'll be further. An intelligent child can have this level of understanding by age 7, while a less intelligent child may not have it until age 10. The level of a particular child's intelligence is tested by a judge. Children under the age of 6, however, are presumed to be unfamiliar with the concept of buying and selling, and therefore cannot make transactions even according to rabbinic law. So basically, they're still young to really have a real understanding of what's going on. Like it's a game, but they don't have a real understanding of it. Now, if their father does not manage their finances, a court appointed administrator, now this is all if, right? We're talking about children doing this. And then they add here, if their father does not manage their finances, a court appoints an administrator to do so for them. Meaning we're talking about the children under 6. The children under 6 either have a father taking care of them, or there's going to be a bezdin that's going to appoint what we had before, an apotropos, an administrator. But it seems that already at an older age, where they can kind of take care of themselves, it would seem like that's what they're going to need to do. Now let's a little bit further. Let's read a little further. Ha'pa'otais. Mekcha, mikachan, mikach, memkarin, memkar. Their purchases are a valid purchase. Their sale is a valid sale. B'metaltalin, when it comes to the movable objects. So again, they explain here, like deaf mutes, minors are considered mentally incompetent and cannot affect legal transactions under biblical law. The rabbis, however, decreed that minors be authorized to buy and sell in order to be able to provide themselves with their basic needs, similar to their enactment regarding deaf mutes. They made this enactment only regarding transactions involving movable property for the reason we said before. In addition, this enactment applies only where no one is managing the children's affairs, and so they must provide for themselves. But if their father or administrator manages their finances for them, their own transactions are not valid. So what comes together here is that these children that we're talking about, that they made this special, they instituted this law to allow them to make transactions. And we say they can do it either from the age of 7, from the age of 10. So that is only if there's no father or no administrator taking care of things. If there is, then we don't allow them to make transactions. The transactions are left up to those who have to support them. Now, it would seem that from what we had before, that under the age of 6, now, so again, if they have these things, fine. But it's possible they're not going to have these things. If it's under the age of 6, it would seem like there's going to be If there's not a father, there's going to be a court administrator. If they're above the age of 6, not necessarily. If there is a father or an administrator even above the age, they'll take care of things and they can't make transactions. But if there is none, and it seems like it's possible that at a certain point the court would not necessarily administer a court appointed administrator. That's what it seems like. Because if they always would, why are we talking about these ages? So we're differentiating between 6 and above. So it seemed like 6 and below, there's going to be someone that at least the court's going to administer for them. Above that, may not necessarily happen, and they'll be of age to take care of themselves. If they have someone to administer what they're doing, it's even above the age of 7, they're not going to be able to do it on their own, because the whole reason the Chamim, the sages, enacted this is so that they can support themselves. If they have someone taking care of them, then they don't need it, and therefore they cannot do it. Have a wonderful day. Ketavach Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I presume the Chavish could